Hello and welcome to episode 27 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. Now, Gar, this is episode 27, and today we're going to be talking all about the Gong Show. And for people listening, I believe it was when we were doing our episode on American Bandstand that this came up in the conversation. And so ever since then, you and I were kind of talking about this would be a fun episode. So let's get right into it because the Gong Show, I believe, premiered on NBC on June 14th, 1976, and ended on July 21st, 1978. So it's a show that ran, for a relatively short time, but it had a huge impact. So what do you remember about the Gong Show, or how the Gong Show first came on your radar?
My favorite character was the unknown comic. That guy was hilarious.
And in doing the research today, I found that in regards to the unknown comic, just to give people a little reference, this was a guy that appeared on more than 150 episodes of The Gong Show, so probably one of the guys that appeared on the show the most. And he was this comedian guy, but the thing was his character, he'd come on with like a paper bag, and nobody knew what he looked like or anything. And so that was kind of his trademark and what he became known for. So what was it about the unknown comic that you really kind of took notice of and just loved?
Well, it was just the premise that his jokes were so bad that he had to wear a
paper bag
over his head. But his jokes weren't bad, and that was a joke in itself, the fact that he was wearing the bag over his head and under that premise. But, the premise was really farthest from the truth because the guy was hilarious.
And let me tell you, in doing this research, because I remember you telling me that this was one of the characters from the Gong Show you really enjoyed. The unknown comic, whose real name is Murray Langston, he was born in Canada on June 27th, 1944, and is currently 78 years old. So he's still currently among the living. He left his parents' house at the age of 16 because they were disabled and financially unable to take care of him. He eventually went on to join the U.S. Navy, and then of course he later go on. I found out to produce some like a comedy hour for the Playboy TV channel after it was called the Unknown Comic Hour for Playboy Television, and this was after the Gong Show. So that's kind of what he did after.
Well, he really was funny, and I just loved the whole premise of the show because it was like out and out craziness from the start of the show all the way to the end of the show. It was the antithesis of all of the other game shows that were on. All the other game shows were slick productions, very eye-catching sets and everything like that, with smooth talking MCs and everything like that. And then you got the Gong Show, which is like the exact opposite of all of that. It's just, it's not a slick production. They're basically using regular people from the street as their acts, and and it's just once the show starts, it's just mayhem. From the beginning all the way to the end, and of course, the audiences loved it.
Yeah, in fact, now just to kind of give people a better idea what the Gong Show was, it was like an amateur talent show contest, which was franchised by Sony Pictures Television. The show premiered, like I said, in 1976. Now, it was originally hosted by this other guy, John Barber. Now, he did not last because Chuck Barris was actually the brains behind the Gong Show. He'd been, of course, a major TV producer long before the Gong Show. He produced both the dating game and the Newlywed game, Bob Eubanks. And so those were his big babies. He created those shows. And even the dating game for its time and the Newlywed game, they were really kind of raw and raunchy. I mean, the Newlywed game especially was known for like asking like kind of raunchy questions. Like I remember watching that back in the day, and one of the things they would always ask is, and watching this on TV, you're kind of like a little stunned, like, oh, I can't believe they asked that. Like, I remember they'd always ask, where's the very first place you and your wife ever made whoopee? And it kind of catch, the couples off guard. But the thing is, the original host, John Barber, he was at odds with Chuck Barris, because Chuck Barris had this idea of kind of having like a chaotic show, like you said, showing people if they were talented or not. He was not so much interested in kind of it being a real talent show. He wanted to kind of show these people that really thought, it kind of to me predates like American Idol, where the big thing with American Idol when that first aired was how Simon Cowell, I mean, his thing was really throwing insults at the contestants, and that's what people were tuning in. And it's this, so Chuck Barris to me kind of predates all that. I mean, a lot of times people say Howard Stern like he's a shock jock. I think Chuck Barris really should get the credit, because he came long before Howard Stern. And you got to remember, the Gong Show was not on the radio, but on television.
Yeah, and you're right. The show was all about the shock value. And that it really worked with the audiences, because the audiences loved it, but the networks, the stuffy people behind their oak desks and everything, were looking down on the show, because they felt that the show was not proper.
Yeah, exactly.
And not the kind of proper banter that they want to be showing on a prestigious network like NBC, which is known for all of these, huge production value stuff that they're putting on, and then you've got Chuck Barris putting on this thing that's much lower in budget, much more rougher around the edges. It's like mayhem and just everybody going crazy on the show, and so of course it becomes kind of a clash, and then you got Chuck Barris trying to explain to the guy that they hired to MC the show, that it is a premise of a competition, but the competition is very secondary. It's more about just showcasing these crazy people doing their crazy things.
Yeah.
And the guy that was emceeing the show just could not get it through his head that it was only in premise only. It was not a serious
talent show
competition.
Yeah. In fact, that was the whole reason he walked off the show. And then the people at NBC basically told Chuck Barris, okay, people are saying they think that you should take over the hosting of the show. And in a way it worked, because, he was the creator behind the show. It was his idea. And I think all his zaniness, if you're honest, that's why people were tuning in. I mean, the funny things, I don't know, last night, Gar, I sent you a little special I found on Chuck Barris. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it, but it was...
Yeah, I got it. I watched it.
But it was basically saying how... the funny thing about when Chuck Barris took over hosting the show, people, because of all his zaniness and the way he acted on the show, people often thought that he was on drugs or he was drunk, when he was taping the shows. And a lot of people that worked for him said no, he was totally against drugs, because he had a daughter that ended up overdosing on drugs, and he was very against drugs and alcohol. And part of it, I guess, his chaoticness, his craziness, the way he acted on the show was because apparently he had a real struggle being on camera. Because prior to that, he was a behind the scenes guy, one of the producers, one of the writers on all these shows he created. And first time in his career he'd ever been from a camera. And apparently all the zaniness and stuff was his way of kind of dealing with his sudden fame, in front of the camera. Because apparently he was very uncomfortable in front of the camera, although looking at him on screen, you never know that.
Well, all I can say is
He was the Gong Show.
I even thought, because you just kind of get that, by the way he's acting on stage. I even thought that, he might have been dabbling in a few recreational things too. He just kind of, that whole banter that he did, would lend itself to give you that impression. And who knows what, the real truth is on that, I mean, what we know about him being against drugs, really could be their, part of their press release. It could really have nothing to do with the truth. And the awesome thing about the fact that this all was happening back in the 1970s is that nobody it'll go down in history as speculation.
Yeah, and here's the thing.
I mean? Nobody will ever be able to prove one way or the other, but I have to admit, I had that impression too. I think it would be a natural thing
to think that.
To have that impression when you're watching the show and you're watching how everything is kind of unfolding in front of you. It was a show that was just, I guess the best way you could put it, it was the punk rock of TV shows. Yeah,
it was really way before its time, and that has a lot to do with why it was only on for 2 years. And what I mean by that is, we already talked about, if you look at shows like American Idol, even they have one on NBC, it's called America's Got Talent. I mean, those shows would not exist without something like the Gong Show first. You know what I mean?
Yes, those shows have the Gong Show's fingerprints all over them.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I remember when American Idol first came on, people were tuning in because they wanted to hear Simon Cowell insult the contestants. I mean, that was what people were tuning in for, not to see necessarily who was the most talented singer. That was part of it. That was part of a show as well. But even after Simon Cowell left American Idol, it wasn't quite the same.
Well, every show is looking for its hook.
Yeah. And
the thing that draws the audience in, and for American Idol, a lot of people really like the singing, and they talk about the singing, but the real hook during that time was Simon Cowell being as brutal as he was with these people, and then the Gong Show's hook was its zaniness and craziness, and the fact. Just think about it. The whole idea of deciding whether somebody should have their act stopped in the middle of it because it was too bad, and by hitting the gong, that is pure out-and-out genius.
Oh, yeah. See, there's never been anything like that since or before. And the thing of it is, I really think we got to give Chuck Barris a lot of credit for what the Gong Show became and was, because again, he was the creator, he was the brains behind it. But the thing is, it did not work with the original host because he did not understand the concept, like you said. And Chuck Barris kind of took over the hosting duties. He ran with it, and it worked because again, this is the first time I think ever on TV that anybody's seen any kind of show with that kind of shock value. I mean,
there was a guy that was on there that shirtless guy, and he would do like a face with with the mouth on his belly, and then they would play some re-recorded song where he was making it look like his belly was actually singing the song.
Wow.
That's the crazy acts that were on this show.
Oh yeah, and then
when you watch that guy with the singing belly, it's hilarious.
Yeah, and
it is just the weirdest looking thing to watch that, and this is what they were putting on TV on this show.
Yeah, and then they had like one of the hosts. I mean, a couple of the hosts were one off the top of my head, Phyllis Diller, who's famous back in the day. They had this other guy, Jamie Farr, that was on MASH at the time, and he was talking about they would hold these crazy auditions, and people would be telling them that like, hey, please call me, to appear on the show because. We drove hours to come out here to audition for a show, or I'm living in my car, so I don't have a phone. Let me call you guys back. And they got all these kind of weird, strange people auditioning for the show. And Chuck Barris in that documentary I sent you was even talking about that when he just go out, in everyday life, people would, or even just waiting at the airport, people would come up to him and they'd audition for him live on the spot. Hey, Chucky baby, let me get on the show. And that's kind of what his life became.
Yeah, well, there was also, hookers. When I was doing research, hookers would audition to be on the Gong Show because if they got the gig to be on the Gong Show, they make way more money than they would if they were, working the streets.
Oh yeah, and the thing is, Chuck Barris. I mean, I think. He deserves the credit because we're not really talking about the original host. When people talk about the Gong Show, they're probably surprised to learn that there was ever anybody that hosted the show before Chuck Barris. I mean, he kind of became the Gong Show, if you know what I mean. Again, he was the brains behind it, but when you think of the Gong Show, that's who you really think of. And a couple other people, like you mentioned today on your Facebook page, another guy that constantly was performing on there, and I think originally. He was like a stagehand or something at the studio.
Oh, the dancing dude.
Yeah, Gene, the dancing machine. And
that guy actually became the most popular, guest on the show.
Yeah. And again, we're talking about a show that was only on the air for 2 years, and we're talking about the original show. And here's a funny thing that. Chuck Barris, because of all his zaniness, for years he kind of got really trashed. People talked a lot of shit about him, and you see that in the documentary where he said, he didn't know for several years how he really felt himself about the Gong Show, if he had any regrets or not about it. But you know what? Again, we talk about the Gong Show. Chuck Barris is who we think of, and even for a show that was only on the air. For 2 years, I mean, it's still being talked about, if you know what I mean. Look at the impact a show that had just a 2-year run had on pop culture. And anybody that wasn't there back in the day, what I've had a lot of fun doing, I'm sure you have, Gar, and doing the research for this episode, you can go on YouTube and you can find a ton of Gong Show episodes that I mean, it really took me back to, I kind of forgotten what a great show this was. And you can do that, and that's a lot of fun.
I highly recommend, anyone that is not familiar or what, just go check out the YouTubes. You won't be disappointed. You'll definitely get some chuckles. You'll definitely see things that you're not expecting to see.
Yeah, and like we talked about in many of our episodes, the funny thing, even with a show like The Gong Show, I mean, when the ratings were pretty good for the show, from what I understand, and so they kept it on for 2 years, and while the ratings were pretty good, they were willing to keep it on the air, and and even all these years later, they didn't like The Gong Show so much, and yet, what's interesting is they've made several attempts to revive it, and none have been quite as I think memorable as the original one with Chuck Barris, but if something was wrong with the Gong Show, then why have they tried to revive it so much?
Exactly, but even the whole premise, why they when the show wound up being canceled was not because of poor ratings.
Yeah.
It was the reason why it was canceled was the clashes between Chuck Barris and the network because because in his vision of the show, it was always about the shock value.
Yeah.
And and part of the shock value of the show was he would interject raciness.
Yeah.
Into the show, and the network execs, were having a serious problem with the raciness that he was interjecting into the show.
And I think part of the problem...
they, like I said, they didn't cancel it because it had poor ratings. They canceled it because of the clash between, Chuck Barris refusing to tone down the raciness of the show. And
I think the other problem that the network had was, unlike with probably all the other shows on there at the time, this was not a case where they could... they didn't like Chuck Barris where they could just outright fire a guy, because apparently what happened was when the original host John Barber walked out on the show and Chuck Barris took over as the host, he was already a co-producer on the show, and I guess by the time he takes over the hosting duties, he's got his own Chuck Barris Productions studio that's basically in charge of 100% of the show. So the network could not just outright fire the guy, and I think that was a big problem they had. Where this, modern day, they'd probably just get a new host, but because he owned the show, they could not just outright fire the guy. Now, let me ask you, because I sent you a video clip a couple weeks ago when we first started talking about doing this episode. If I say the Popsicle Twins incident, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that is, it's famous, but it's actually infamous.
Because that's actually, we're going to get into next, and that's actually the episode that really ended the Gong Show. It took it off the air.
Yeah, and getting back to what I was saying, the raciness.
I could not believe it myself. I was reading about this and doing the research for today's show. The Popsicle Twins incident. Now, not even knowing what it was about originally, just reading about it, it sounded pretty racy. I'm like, then I got to go on YouTube to see if it's this infamous. But then I was thinking maybe YouTube wouldn't post something like that. But amazingly they did. And what it is the Popsicle Twin incident is you had these two teenage girls. I'm guessing they must have been around 14, 15, or 16. Pretty good looking teenage girls and kind of seductively dressed clothes, and they're sitting like cross-legged in these short shorts, and they've each licking a popsicle like in a very seductive way. And again, you're watching this and just can't believe back in the 1970s that this was on the air. In fact, one of the celebrity guests on the show that night, I think, was Jamie Farr, who was on MASH at the time, and he was saying, they were allowing this to remain on the air. The censors weren't stopping it. We just could not. We were like in shock. We could not believe that this was allowed to go on the air, but they allowed it on the air. And once the episode was over, the network went crazy and went off on Chuck Barris. He had enough with him, and he decided, okay, you know what? This is the end of the Gong Show, and that was it for him.
Well, he's. That was what we were talking about before, the clash between him and the studio, and about him interjecting raciness into the show, and it's a really infamous episode.
I strongly urge people to check out.
Then again, the people that were gravitating towards the show were not people
who really gave a damn.
Right, what I mean? They were the prime audience for that type of entertainment. The racy, subject matters or whatever they're doing in the act. There was one where Gene the Dancing Machine's dancing, and J.P. Morgan, who was one of the judges, she was a very famous comedian back in those, which is a female comedian, and she exposed her breasts on the show.
Yeah, and you know, they did
so
actually.
The show just had no limits, and Chuck Barris, you know, was very unashamed about that.
Yeah, and it's funny that, like, if you watch that documentary, you know, but later in his life, he kind of like had regrets, doubts, like, you know, should I have done it differently? But I dare say I have no regrets, you know, because again, we're talking about all these years later. It's had an impact on pop culture. It meant something to people. And again, if it didn't mean something to people, they would not have, you know, when something's a success like that, no matter if they've had issues with the network and stuff, if it was a success at one time, oftentimes they try to revive it, which they've done with this several times. I mean, I think I was reading the last time they attempted to revive this was in 1989. And of course, it just, you can never really go back to the past.
Well, you know, there is still an audience for that type of programming today. In fact, you know, I personally think that audience exists now, even bigger than it used to exist back then. But it's just the world doesn't have an appetite for a resurgence of something that had its popularity from a long time ago. What somebody should do is create a newer, modern version of no holds barred, you know, absolute mayhem TV show that might be influenced by it, but is not a remake.
Yeah, and if you're going to do something even like that, I think it'd be cool to get, like, maybe an actual band or something, or an actual drummer, like, to bang the gong, you know, just like really rock out the audience, do something different, you know.
You know, there's definitely a market. There's definitely an opening right now for someone to come out with a show that's not a copy of the Gong Show, but in the same vein, same genre as that type of a show. Oh, and it's, you know, prime right now.
You know, and we were talking a little bit about the Newlywed game, because that was another thing Chuck Barris created that predates the Gong Show. And again, I used to love to watch the Newlywed game, and you can watch old episodes, I think, like on the Game Show Network now. But back in the day, it was really raunchy, because but we've seen that, if you know what I mean. So, like, even when they came back with the new Newlywed game, it was still hosted by Bob Eubanks, so people were tuning into it for that reason. But again, it wasn't as raunchy as when you're seeing it for the first time back in the 70s, because, okay, we've seen this, it's nice to see it again, but it is what it is.
Well, you know, they had their way of making it socially acceptable on those shows. But, you know, I mean, you look at it, you know, he put on a lot of TV shows back in those days. And a lot of these shows, you know, had a small amount of, you know, success. But, you know, three of the whole body of work that he had during that time went on to become iconic. I mean, literally iconic, because when you think about it, the Newlywed game is still being shown on these other
networks,
you know, retro TV channels and stuff like that. The dating game is still being shown on these retro shows, and the Gong Show. You know, out of all of his body work, you know, those three stand out: the dating game, the Newlywed game, and the Gong Show.
And then what? Yeah.
And you know, I mean, there's so many people. They're lucky if they even get one to become successful. And then Chuck Barris has three
iconic shows
have become iconically successful.
And that's the thing in doing the Gong Show today. In the documentary I sent you last night, it also, I think, has something where he was talking about, you know, when he chose Bob Eubanks to host the Newlywed, show, Newlywed Game, he was really just like Bob Eubanks was really just a radio DJ, and that's how he found him. And he said he actually had to, when you watch the Newlywed Game now, these old episodes, it looks, you're saying, oh yeah, Bob Eubanks, he's perfect for this. But he said, in that documentary, he explained that he had to kind of explain to Bob Eubanks how to, ask the questions on TV, do it in a certain way so it would get reaction out of the audience. So, I mean, he's even, got the, the brains to know how to do that. You can't just ask the question. You got to do it in a certain way to get a certain reaction. And again, he had a certain eye for the talent. I mean, fact that, back in the day, he was just a disc jockey, but he thought something about Bob Eubanks that he would be perfect for that. And you know what? He was right.
I just remember, all three of those shows. The Newlywed and the Dating Game were more 60s.
Yeah.
And then the Gong Show was more 70s.
Yeah.
But the Newlywed and the Dating Game, when you think about all of these shows, the one thing that really stands out is Chuck Barris had
a vision.
He really had his finger on the pulse of the young audience, because that is really the appeal of all three of those shows that became hugely successful for him. Is they really were very different from the other game shows that were being put on, and the appeal was to appeal to a different demographic, a different audience than what all the other game shows were trying to do.
Yeah, if you look at the Newlywed Game and the Dating Game, what is interesting is, even though they were a little raunchier than some of the stuff on TV, he was able to get away with that like on network TV because it didn't get too overly raunchy like maybe the Gong Show did, and you were still able to consider that maybe family entertainment, being on in the evening. And the other thing is, we actually talked in a couple of our other past episodes, the Dating Game did come up because you remember, like when we were doing the episode on American Graffiti, we were mentioning that before a lot of these stars were ever anybody, they did appear on the Dating Game. Suzanne Summers, Tom Selleck.
Yes, it's a literal who's who. It's a parade of people that eventually went on to become major stars.
I forget who else, but there's like 4 or 5, maybe 6 celebrities that appeared on the Dating Game before they were ever anybody famous.
I don't want to go into the dark area.
Yeah.
But there actually was a serial killer that appeared on the Dating Game.
Wow, I remember hearing something about that. That is just totally amazing. And also the documentary I sent you, it talked about that Chuck Barris, years after the Gong Show, he wrote this book called something Dangerous Mind or something. I have to look it up, but he made this wild claim in there that all these years while he was producing these TV shows, he was behind the scenes, supposedly an assassin for the CIA, and this was this wild story going around for years and years. And again, just kind of a story he puts out there. People kind of question, is it true? And before he died, he's like, well, even if it is or isn't, I can't really let you know, can I? And so there's just one of those kind of urban myth things that he kind of put out there.
I never believed it myself.
Yeah.
And 90% of the people that I talked to, about, that I was very far,
I'm with you there.
To find anyone that actually believed, that because it's so far-fetched.
Yeah.
The two really don't go hand in hand. A person that's going to be a hitman doesn't want to become a public celebrity. It's a clash in what you do. You're in the shadows. Nobody knows who you are. You're not in the public. It just doesn't really make sense. But then also the fact that he's putting out
urban myth,
a false narrative like that, about himself, really kind of also fuels, that whole speculation that people have about, the dabbling in drugs and all that kind of stuff, because that's kind of what somebody, that dabbles in drugs would do is spout off a stupid thing, like that, just out of the blue. What I mean? It really, when you're in your right mind and you're not all freaking high on something or whatever, you're not like throwing out crazy things like that. Or most people normally don't do that. But if you're dabbling in drugs and you're doing all that kind of stuff, that's usually where you find where people will wind up doing something like that. So that is also, part of what fuels the speculation about, and not really trusting the press release that he was really anti-drugs and all that kind of stuff.
But the thing of it, Gar, is we're talking about it, and what I mean is, not only did they allow him to put it in a book that he published that was out there, but the book was so popular that shortly before he died, he started making all these appearances at Barnes and Noble stores and stuff, and doing all these signings, and people would come out to see him, and he got enough people believing that it may or may not be true that they actually ended up making a movie about it. And the name of the movie and the book is escaping me, but I will post it when we post all this episode next week.
Yeah, George Clooney directed the movie, and it goes into this whole thing about him being a hitman for the CIA.
Well, that's what the movie I think was based on.
You see what I'm saying, though? About how when you wind up doing things like that, saying things like that, these crazy stories about being a hitman. Yeah. I think one of the first things that pops in your head is, that guy must be high.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah. I tell you, I think I'm gonna see if I can scout out that movie, because again, it gets you thinking. Okay, even a guy like George Clooney thought this would make for a good movie. Hey Chucky baby, let's make a movie about this book you put out about this crazy claim. So even George Clooney thought it was worth making a movie over. And again,
it's so outlandish.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a great premise, for putting something out there. Because when you're putting a product out there that's outlandish, there's a very high possibility that it could wind up going viral.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is, if you look at the Gong Show, I mean, the sets and the colors and everything, it looked like a big kind of circus tent. It looked like a circus stage. All his crazy outfits were really kind of zany. So you just did not know where to look. It was like a circus, on live TV. You did not know.
Yes. Yeah, that is a really accurate way to put it. The show was almost kind of like a circus.
Yeah, and in fact, in that documentary I sent you, it was also talking about, if you notice that in a lot of episodes he wore these crazy hats. He, again, claiming that he had really trouble, being talent on the camera, being on stage. He was trying to hide, his eyes and stuff, so people weren't like looking at his face. But again, crazy Chuck Barris, he was a 3-ring circus leader. We could not help but look at what he was doing.
There's always these. I don't know the best way to describe it, but sometimes success for a particular band or a particular TV show or a particular movie, or sometimes the success of whatever that is also part of the actual time that it actually happened. It's like just a time, and all of a sudden there's this whole recipe for it, the perfect time for something like this to happen. And then it becomes hugely popular during that particular time.
Yeah.
And then people look back now, and then they see how popular it was, and then they want to resurrect it, because wow, if it was really popular then, let's resurrect it and let's do it now, because maybe it'll be just as popular now. And usually it's not.
Yeah.
Because now is not that actual same time. The things that are going on now are not the same things that were going on. The societal shift has completely changed over this 10, 15, 20-year time period where the times are not conducive for that same formula. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's really weird how a show can be like really popular right at this particular time back in the mid 1970s, and then back in the mid 80s they could try to resurrect it, and it's not, and it just doesn't really go over.
Yeah, and now remembering when you were tuning into the Gong Show, I mean, were you really tuning into because you thought it was a great talent show, or were you wanting to see people get gonged?
I was, because it goes back to Forrest Gump. That show was like a box of chocolate.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to get. Yeah. I love that. But that's the thing. I mean, and yet at the same time, we've got these people that appeared on the show. For example, we mentioned the Unknown Comic. We mentioned Gene the Dance Machine. Now, these are just two examples of some guests that appeared on the show that all these years after the Gong Show has been off the air. Anytime anybody refers to the Gong Show, Chuck Barris, the Unknown Comic, Gene the Dance Machine comes up. So, again, because of this show, these two acts I'm mentioning, they had some kind of impact on people. I mean, the fact that the Unknown Comic kind of resonated with you, the fact that he appeared on over 150 shows, it even got me to think, okay, what has this guy done since, I'm
really surprised that the Unknown Comic, didn't wind up having this hugely successful career after the Gong Show.
Yeah, again.
I'm sure he did have, a certain amount of success because of it, but I'm really surprised that he didn't have a huge career, and who knows? Who knows what went on in his life, or what life choices he made? Because we're all pilots of our own life.
Again,
but I really, he was so funny. It's very surprising that he didn't wind up continuing having success.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I'm going to see later if I can find anything on him, like as far as on social media anywhere. I haven't had a chance to do that, but what I was able to find out today, like I said, in early 1980, Langston revealed himself. His name, like I said, is Murray Langston, and he revealed himself as the Unknown Comic on an episode of Real People. He also, after the Gong Show, like I said, went on to produce a comedy hour for the Playboy TV channel. So he did a little something, and I dare say that if it had not been for his appearances on the Gong Show, he may not have even gotten those opportunities.
Never have had those other opportunities.
And I just I want to go online later, see if I can find the episode of, I guess it's a talk show from back in the day, Real People. I don't quite remember what that was. But apparently he went on there and took his famous paper bag off his face. But again, just think, a guy putting a paper sack on his, over his head, I mean, becoming famous for that.
It's genius. It really was genius, because the first time he walked out on that stage with that bag over his head, you're laughing already. In fact,
there was an episode that I was watching last night of the Gong Show where he appeared, and this other person comes on, supposedly a girl that says that she just had his baby, and then they come on with a little baby, and it's got a little paper. I can say, oh, okay. Oh, and now it makes sense. But just little funny stuff like that. And also, they did have other famous people on the show. I mean, apparently, Pee Wee Herman appeared years ago. You know, his original name is Paul Rubens, and I don't know what he did but he appeared before he was.
He would strike me as the type of person that he's that perfect type of person to appear on the Gong Show.
But they say he appeared on there before he was ever Pee Wee Herman or famous in any way. And then another person that appeared on the show during its heyday when he was famous was Alice Cooper. There was a clip of Alice Cooper like in a guillotine, you know, like he does on stage, and he's singing the song "I'm Slightly Out of My Mind" or "Head" or something like that. And it was just killer. I'm going to post that so people can see that, because I think people will dig that. Anybody tuning in?
Oh, absolutely.
In fact, you can go online, or I'll send you the clip later, Gar. But it's pretty cool, because I know you're an Alice Cooper fan like me. But I mean, see, that's another thing back in the days. You get people like Alice Cooper, you know, these well-known celebrities at the time, appearing on some of these, you know, TV shows. Like I know also Alice Cooper back in the day appeared like on the Muppet Show and stuff like that. So it's kind of interesting, you know, that a lot of people would appear on these shows.
When a show's popular, everybody wants to be on it, and everybody wanted to be on it. You know, all these other regulars that were regulars on all of these other game shows from the same time period were on his show. You know, the Paul, you know, back in the mid-'70s, Paul Lynde was like game show royalty.
Hollywood Squares, Bewitched. I mean, a lot of people, if you watch Bewitched, know him for being Uncle Arthur.
Yeah, Hollywood Squares, all of those shows, and you know, all of these people that were super popular on all of these other game shows, they were on the Gong Show too.
Oh yeah.
You know, and you know, everybody wants to be on a popular show.
And you know, in closing today's episode, I think we also got to mention the fact that like right as the Gong Show was wrapping up, you know, around the time they did the popsicle twin incident, you know, and Chuck Barris just kind of said, okay, I quit. He didn't want to put up with any of the censorship stuff anymore. He just kind of had it, but at that point too, people were kind of trashing on Chuck Barris. The network of people were saying, oh, what kind of guy is this guy? Well, you know, why does he want to have a show making fun of people and you know, trashing people and hurting people's feelings, which again, that was really not his concept. It concept was not to make fun of people. It was kind of let's just have kind of a shocking, fun show. And in fact, he was saying, like in the documentary I sent you, that you know, I'd have people coming up to me wanting to, you know, while I'm waiting in the airport to go somewhere, auditioning for me. Hey, Chucky baby, let me appear on the Gong Show. And he says, I wasn't trying to make fun of people, just trying to do a fun show. So again, people kind of misreading other people's intentions, but isn't that the world we live in?
Well, can't you say that about America's Funniest Home Videos too?
Yeah.
That's a TV show that's capitalizing on regular people watch. You know, the same premise that you were explaining.
Yeah.
That the networks were justifying in hassling Chuck Barris in his formats for his TV shows.
Yeah.
But yet, those same formats that they're giving Chuck Barris grief over became hugely successful formats for other shows that followed, and America's Funniest Videos is an exact example of how wrong those executives are about what they were saying.
And yet they still put...
You see what I'm saying? You know, if you're going to come down on Chuck Barris for that, then why put on a show like America's Funniest Videos? It's the same basic premise of what the formula that Chuck Barris was using, just in a different way. One's using videos, the other are people being put on a stage.
Yeah, and I dare say it's not even like where somebody's sending videos of somebody else making fun of somebody else. These are the actual people creating these videos and then sending them into the TV network because they want to be on, America's Funniest Video. In fact, I've been wanting to do an episode of our show, Gar, on America's Funniest Video for so many reasons. I mean, probably the biggest reason is the recent passing of the original host Bob Saget. But if you think about something like America's Funniest Video, since you brought it up, I dare say, I mean, they really had something special because, I mean, America's Funniest Video, if you think about it, it really kind of is a precursor to YouTube.
Yes. In fact, it without that,
there wouldn't be a YouTube.
We would not have been a natural progression to YouTube. It really is a facilitator for YouTube.
Yeah, and I had a lot of fun doing today's episode, and when we post this next week, I found a lot of stuff that I'm going to post on our Facebook page for Gar Borras' Time Machine. A lot of fun little clips from the documentary we were talking about that I sent you last night, and I'm going to post a lot of this, a lot of the different Gong Show episodes because I think for people that were there back in the day, like you and me, Gar, or people that weren't, it's really fun to watch, these little episodes. And the thing of it is too, it's fun to get to see, especially if you weren't there. And then if you were there, it kind of takes you back, to what a fun show it was. And it's amazing to see how many people kind of have been, how many views these little Gong Show clips get. But see, people are still checking it out all these years later.
People want to laugh.
Yeah, and that's what's missing.
Especially with things, being, how they are and everything like that. I think comedy is more important now than ever. And, and people do want to laugh, and I hope people never reach a point where they don't want to laugh anymore. You know what I mean? That's a society that I don't want to live in. You and me both, my friend. I mean, I'll tell you, I agree with the sentiment that laughter is the best medicine. A lot of times, I go through life like anybody, and I kind of joke my way through life, and everybody sometimes tell me, "Oh, you're always telling jokes, you're always laughing." Well, why don't you try it? Well, I think the best way, the ultimate way to end this podcast would be with
a laugh.
The gong.
Okay, let's hear it. Gong. Pre-simulated, but let me ask you. Oh
my gosh, that would be so incredible.
Yeah, we should have thought of that.
This with the gong.
We should have thought of it. But let me ask you, Gar. And wrapping it up for today, I seen something you were posting on Facebook that you were having trouble with Facebook. Do you want to discuss that at all?
Basically, there are a number of things. I've been promoting on Facebook
for years. Yeah.
For probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about almost 15 years.
Wow.
And that's a long time.
Yeah.
And for all of those 15 years, whenever I wanted to promote shows, I could, the popular thing on Facebook is there are a lot of people in a particular city that they will create a group for people to join that group that are into seeing live bands. Yeah. And so they'll create a group where, basically, bands, when they're doing their shows, they could put their show information in the group, and then the people that want to go see bands, they'll go to that group and they'll see, so and so is playing here. So and so, Appetite for Destruction is playing over here. Let's go to that show.
Like the Facebook tribute band.
So that was a very common thing, and bands would constantly post their shows in these groups and advertise their shows. And and this went on for many, many, many years, and it was like, it was a common practice.
Yeah.
Well, now Facebook has completely shut all of that down.
Wow.
Which means that, because if they're not allowing me to do it anymore, I'm promoting for my show coming up on August 13th at the House of Blues, where we have a promotion where if you, in exchange for joining our email list, you can get free tickets to our next show at the House of Blues in Anaheim.
Wow.
And you can go to the House of Blues website, or you can go to Live Nation where they sell the tickets, and they're selling these tickets for $17.50 a ticket plus fees. Now, when you add the fees, now you're looking at more like at least $20 or more.
Wow.
For those tickets.
Yeah.
And so, basically, if we, say for example, if somebody asks for 4 tickets, that that means that you are worth $80 of free tickets to us.
Wow.
Just to be our fans.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're not paying you $80, but we're giving you $80.
The equivalent. Yeah.
And that's what you being our fan is worth to us.
Wow.
And so we're doing this promotion, right?
Yeah.
And and I'm posting this information in these groups, where people can get free tickets to our show, and Facebook has completely shut me down.
One thing we're going to wrap.
No longer post anything promoting my shows, and they keep sending it back to me. Like sometimes I'll get 3, sometimes I'll get 5, sometimes I'll get 10. Of these posts, that I put out a long time ago. And they're sending them back to me saying that they recognize those posts as spam.
Wow.
And they completely shut me down. And if they're shutting me down, they're shutting all the other bands, which means that those groups are now completely worthless, because if the bands can't post stuff because it's being recognized as spam, that means that they're getting shut down too. They're not just going to single me out. They're going to single everybody out. And why is Facebook doing this? Why are they doing it? The reason why they're doing it is because they're forcing you to pay to do these promotions.
Yeah.
If you want to, they're not going to stop me from paying to have that exact same advertisement that I was putting in those groups. They're not going to stop me from, if I pay for it.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's all forcing people to pay that now, and they are shutting people down from what people have been doing for literally years and years and years, from doing a common practice on Facebook by all bands. Now they're completely shutting that down. And so, I'm really frustrated. I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. Because I can't really do what I need to do without them. But if you give me a choice, if there was a choice and there was another alternative that wasn't doing things like that, that would allow me to be able to promote for my shows and not have this massive amount of greed to shut me down from doing my promotions, to force me to pay to do that exact same thing. If there was another option that wasn't doing that to me, I would jump in a heartbeat. And remember, there was a time that everybody was jumping from MySpace to Facebook.
Oh, sure. And there'll be something.
Because they were dissatisfied with MySpace, and they were just jumping in droves. Well, it would be very hard to convince me that somebody in the future isn't going to come up with a new format of a social media site where people can do.
Yeah.
Chaotic Crisp Magazine.